Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Shop Stool podcast. We're very excited today. We have our second guest, and I say our second ghost, our second guest for the season, who is coming all the way from Perth. Have we had a Western Australia guest? Am I about to get us in trouble by saying we're not sure when we really have?
I have no idea.
I don't think so. No, I think this is the first.
Oh,
Cool.
what an honour.
Well, there we go. Welcome to the show, Mark Lilly. You're our first WA guest.
Thank you very much.
So obviously we're very, very excited to hear your story. Bryan actually got Joey and I onto you originally, and said, let's get him on the show because he's got a very interesting background. So with that in mind, just to give the listeners an idea, how did you get into furniture making?
So I would put myself in the camp of being a self-taught hobbyist, kind of coming up through the ranks furniture maker. I have no formal training in cabinetry or anything other than a few short courses early on. But probably about 15 years ago, when I was living in London, the nature of being in London and not really having any access to furniture or moving around rentals a lot and not having transport to move furniture around, I kind of got into furniture making as more of a necessity. Just doing that whole grabbing a pallet and chopping it up and making a coffee table or literally whatever I needed for a new rental apartment. And then when the term comes up, just kind of leaving it there or chucking it in the bin and going to the next place and trying to do a bit better every time, really. And I was at that kind of capacity as a hobbyist for probably about 10 years or so, just slightly increasing my skills and techniques and awareness of woodworking and other woodworkers and design. And I moved to Perth 6 years ago now and started to find little workshops that I could kind of carry it on in whatever capacity I wanted to. I'd always worked in design. I was an exhibition designer in London, and since moving to Perth, I worked in another studio here. And I used moving to Perth as one of those great excuses where you can just go to anyone you want, super naively. You go to all the designers in Perth that you see are doing things, all the woodworkers, all the studios, all the workshops. And I just went and introduced myself to everyone and wanted to get to know what everyone was up to and what everyone was doing and get a feel for the Perth design scene, really, and who was doing what around. And I got pally with a good friend of mine called Angus, who is the director of the Perth workshop for a brand called Remington Matters. We're a designer. And they have studios in Adelaide and Perth, and they produce furniture, contemporary furniture for the kind of commercial and residential markets. And he hounded me for like 2 years, being like, come on, you got to come and work for me. And I got to a point in my other job where I was like, yeah, why not? I never knew whether working in a full-time capacity would ruin it for me as a hobby or whether it would absolutely make it and make me realize that this is what I want to be doing full time. And luckily for me, it did the latter. And I've been working for Remington Matters as a full-time maker for 4 years now. But saying that, I've still kept that side part where I'm like, oh, I've got a few of my own ideas I want to work with and a few my own kind of direction I want to take with things, and that falls under my own kind of design studio brand name Manor, and that literally takes all other hours of my day that isn't full-time work. I'm coming up with my own ideas and prototypes and more experiments in design as opposed to just kind of making things. Yeah, I think that leads me up to present day pretty much.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how do you juggle Well, what is the differences between you're obviously working, building some kind of furniture pieces for your day job, and then how do you find that essentially being told what to do and how to do it, I guess, and then you get to design your own stuff and make it. I mean, there's lots of questions about how do you find that, and then how do you find, is it too much woodworking, or
What a crazy question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it absolutely is. I think the distinction between the two is, that's a great question. Yeah, at Remington, we work with a lot of architects who will specify architectural joinery, or they've got a design. And I love that challenge of being given some drawings and be like, this is what they want, work it out. And I guess that leaves room for some more experimental pieces that doesn't necessarily have either a market in mind, or it's not what I do with Manor. I'm not designing things for a market necessarily, which obviously if you were to have it as a business, you'd have to take that into account. But I just leave it almost as a little buffer. If I've got ideas that I want to explore, that are different typologies of furniture or different functions or just different ways of getting to circumnavigating traditional routes to reach certain points, then I'll explore that. But again, there's no kind of pressure with it. That's what I like with Manor. If I haven't got any ideas or I don't feel up for it, I'm not worrying about it too much. It's just when that kind of spark hits me and I'm like, right, I want to get a prototype of this idea made. If I go about it this way, that'll produce something different. And that's the distinctive, that's where I kind of separate the two, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really smart way. Like we get asked by so many people, how do they transition into woodworking as a business? But doing it when you're working on somebody else's dollar, you're getting paid, and then you're using this as a creative endeavor. So you're basically being paid to upskill yourself.
Exactly.
And then you're not under pressure with, are you able to use their workshop, Mark, or do you have a home workshop, or how does that arrange?
Yeah, I am quite fortunate with that. So, we're allowed to use the workshop if we're doing it in a kind of paid job capacity, then we chuck a bit of money for a few beers at the end of the day. Right. But if it's something that we're just exploring our own ideas, then they allow us to just use the workshop for free. But I've also got a little garage workshop that is more just really little small scale experiments and prototypes. Yeah.
And I guess that then explains, because I had a look at your website, that explains why a lot of your products are on the smaller end. You're not making big 8-seater dining tables. All of your products look like they're made to order. So you've got and again, this is just talking about your website. Do you take on commission works, or is that all that you do is your own products?
I do take on commission works, but that's where this dynamic with my employer works out really well. Is if I do get commissions for larger scale products and dining tables and things like that, and I can just pass that on to Remington. I'm quite happy to say, yeah, I'll take it on, I'll design it, but you'll get an invoice through these guys, and I'll make that in my 9 to 5, and I send as much work their way than comes my way, to be honest. And with those,
it's a really unique kind of symbiosis between two businesses, kind of helping each other out. And I feel like a lot of businesses would hate that. The potential to steal someone's client from someone is there, right? I mean, there's a lot of trust involved with your employer, and it's great that they're pretty open to it.
Absolutely. And Perth isn't a big place. There's not loads of these kind of jobs with a real contemporary direction in furniture. There's not many of these commissions knocking about. So as you say, it is a trust, and we're both very open about things. And I understand. I'm very privileged and fortunate to be able to use their workshop as and when, and I appreciate that trust so much that I'm more than happy to not make a lot of money out of my manner and design side. I might get a design fee on a few things that we just then make. It's manner as a creative expression isn't necessarily about the money, and that's what I think is the interesting part, is that it doesn't have to be about the money, because I probably could, if I wanted to, scale manner up and start doing a bit more of a range and push that out and commission work. But from what I hear, like some episodes with you guys, not that you guys are putting me off, but a lot of talks with other people, that's probably not a stress I want to take on in life, to be honest.
Yeah, if you want to keep what hair you've got left, take it from me and Robin.
Yeah. We've painted a pretty miserable picture for 2025 so far. So I get what you're saying, Mark. I wanted to quickly go back to something you said about when you were coming up. So in London, what were you doing in London work-wise? Was there anything to do with design?
I bounced through lots of different peripheral design jobs. I think I always enjoyed making with my hands, but when I was young and just out of university, I studied computer science and maths, so that's where I'm coming from, and always had this kind of starry-eyed view of the creative industry and the design industry, but it was so far from what I was doing. But I worked in a large kind of fashion retail store in London, and they had a creative team that used to make installations for void spaces in the store. And I was just like, oh my God, I want that job. It's so cool. So I just used to work a whole shift in the store during the day, and then they'd be on a night shift doing all these kind of making and moving things around. And I'd do a night shift with them. And then I'm pretty sure I went back to a day shift once. I don't think I slept for like 48 hours. And eventually just kind of proved myself and got in with this creative team. And then I had access to like a little small studio, and I could come up with my own ideas for little installations and sculptures and stuff. And then that kind of later on pushed me into a bit more kind of window display design and eventually exhibition design, which prior to furniture making was my job for the past kind of 8 years. So working with either museums or curators or collectors or artists or galleries in any capacity, really, whether it was a standard kind of art gallery show or whether it was a museum heritage collection that they wanted to display. I worked in designing that experience for people, including like the spatial aspect of all the plinths and display cases, but then also the narratives around the pieces. And yeah, that was fun, but it just didn't have that hands-on experience that I wanted. And that was why I kept doing furniture making in my spare time. And eventually I was like, nah, I've got to give it a go. I've been obsessed with making for over a decade at that point. It would be silly for me not to give it a go.
Yeah. So then when you came to Perth, you had that little bit of experience that you could say, well, I'm not completely new, and that's going to help me engage with potential employers.
Yeah, that's it. And I jumped on the men's shed model, and I was like, this is incredible. Yeah. And I went there, and there was all the old boys with their 4 fingers on each hand, and it kind of scared me a bit, but that was a means to an end for a little while.
Yeah. I love what you said earlier, because about approaching people in Perth, because I think you really hit on a good point there. When you've been living in a town or a city for your whole life, and suddenly you want to do a thing, it feels weird to suddenly go to all these people who know you and go, well, now I'm a different person. Yeah. Let's start again. And being able to come from another country totally gives you that front foot. But I was interested because I wondered if when you approached those people, because you were from out of state or out of the country, did they look at you with a bit of concern because they don't know what type of experience you have?
I think absolutely. To your first point, everyone who I kind of met in the making capacity, I kind of explained like, oh, I'm new to the city. I just want to get to meet people and see if, like, I don't know, see if you kind of find your tribe, find your people that are looking and aspiring to do the same things that you are. And every single one of them was like, oh, I'm so jealous. Like, I could never do that. But I don't know why. As you say, it is like in a small city, you might know a few of the people already, or you might have this thing in your head that, oh, they're aware of me, but it'd be weird if I just, but I don't, there's nothing stopping anyone at any point. Just be like, right, I'm just going to go and introduce myself to loads of people. But to your second point, sorry, Joey.
Oh, you carry on.
I was going to say to your second point, I think it was the way in which I was introduced. I didn't go up to people and be like, hi, I'm an aspiring woodworker. I want to do this or this or this. I was literally just going with no motive, really. I was just going to meet people. And I think they respected that I wasn't coming to them like a contractor, like, oh, here's my brochure.
Right.
I'd love to work with you sometime. I was just coming from a really kind of level perspective and saying, I've seen what you do. I love this project and I love your work, and I just want to see what the design scene in Perth has to offer.
Mm, I like that, because that is because we have a lot of listeners on the show who are trying to bridge that gap, make that leap. So it is very interesting to hear how you did it.
It's we've talked a lot about how furniture makers tend to be guys who stick to their little workshops, and they're good at working by themselves, and tend to be, I think, overall creative type of introverts to a certain degree. And what you've just explained is like the extrovert version of being a maker, because it also comes to do with the being confident in yourself about even just going to talk to people like that. It's something that I probably would never have been able to do. Just my personality, just to go and talk to people is so foreign to me. So like, kudos to you for having the balls to go and just have conversations with randoms and talk about what you want to do, and not just be bogged down in fear and all those other things.
I think for what it's worth, it's definitely a learned trait. I never used to be like that. And obviously with a lot of imposter syndrome, having not studied anything design related formally, there's a hell of a big hurdle to get over with imposter syndrome. But also one thing I did when I, not long after I moved over, I realized exactly what you said. Everyone who I'd met is quite siloed in their workshops. They tend to not be too confident in talking about what they do. Mm-hmm. So early on, I just set up, I had in my head, I was like, oh, there's no networking. There's a lot of networking things in Perth for like interior designers and architects, but there's none for furniture makers. And I just thought, oh, none of these people who I've met have ever been in a room together at the same time, with more than 3 of them maybe. And I was thinking about that for ages. And then one night I had a few beers at home and I kind of realized, all it takes is an Instagram group, Design Drinks. I'll just add everyone I've just met. And that was probably a bit ballsy, I think. I probably wouldn't have done it if I didn't have a few beers. But I invited everyone. I was like, I don't think any of you have all been in the same room together. And from what I've seen, you're all super passionate in pushing things in the same direction. Let's get a drink in. And I just set up this group almost for people to talk shop a bit, similar to your podcast, really. And if they've got machines for sale, they can put it up there. But then also just to get them out of the workshops, get them in a brewery. And then the first one, I had about 45 different makers turn up from Perth. Oh. And it was a fantastic night. And everyone was just meeting people who they've been friends with on Instagram maybe. And they're like, oh, I've loved your work for like 3 years, but they never quite able to make that next step or that connection. And then all of a sudden, everyone was in a room together, and loads of new creative connections were made as well.
It's super important, because as soon as you are on a first name basis with someone who thinks similarly to you and you understand their capabilities, straight away your mind goes to, what could we work on together? I just had a client talk about this thing which I can't do, but you could do that part of it and I could do this part of it, and then we get the job together. It's straight away.
That's it. There's so much more community around woodworking that isn't fulfilled in that way. Or even, just a lot of people having other people to bounce ideas back off, being like, oh, I've got this idea for something like this. What do you reckon? How would you do this? And fostering that as well is quite important for me.
Our piece of advice to new makers is always to put themselves out there in terms of entering as many exhibitions and prizes. Well, maybe not our advice, but that's what I always say to people. To not only build confidence in their own work, but to do that kind of social networking with other makers. Obviously, I met you at Vivid, Mark. Can you talk us through what that experience was like? Was that your sort of first exhibition competition that you'd entered, or was there a few more before that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was my first one. It's a great initiative because it's such a low barrier to entry. It's free to enter within your first 5 years of practice. And I think that was my last year I was eligible to enter, and I'd entered every year since. I had a couple of pieces being made a finalist the fun COVID year when it didn't happen, so I was a bit gutted about that. So I was very pleased that this piece that I made a design for it was selected that year, and that was a fantastic experience. As you say, it is, if anything, it is a great opportunity to learn how to put yourself out there. And you've got to go there and stand near your thing for 3 days and just chat to anyone that is interested, or if you really want to put yourself out there, try and beckon people to it and get people talking about it, which is terrifying. I didn't do that.
I see Joey squirming in his seat at the thought of that.
Well, we did a great thing because you're there with like 20 other designers. It's so much easier to sell someone else's work. So we did that. No one wants to talk about themselves, but if you could go up and someone's looking at your friend's piece, they'll just give you a little nod, and I'll go up and be like, oh, this is Jess Humpston's piece. Isn't she incredible? Look how she did this. I'm so like, that's such a clever design detail. And you can talk about it much better that way than going up and be like, hi, I'm the maker. Look how clever I am. Isn't this amazing? You can't do that.
It's a fun idea, actually, to have all the makers stand next to anyone else's work and try and sell it on behalf of the other maker. It'd be like a fun exercise.
That's what we did. And then towards the end, if there was really some interest, we'd be like, oh, I think she's here, actually. Oh, there she is. Yeah, like, and then make that connection then. And then they'll realise that the maker's been stood behind them the whole time. But Vivid was great for that. And there's a lot of people, especially being from Perth, there are a lot of big architects and interior designers and figureheads, really, of Melbourne design scene that would come through that. There was, like, sales-wise, it wasn't too high, but I don't think I went in with that expectation whatsoever. It was literally just about getting people to put a face to a name and getting my name out there.
Your name obviously has got out there with the Annabelle Prize, getting the runner-up place in that. Can we please talk about the Banksia chair and everything behind it? All right, okay, let's go. Robin, can you actually can you get a photo of it up for people that are watching on YouTube to save them? Can you do that? No, we've got this fancy new technology.
He's just not prepared.
Yeah.
You're seeing through my smoke and mirrors. Give me a sec, I will.
That's all right. You start talking about it, Mark.
Yeah.
Talk about the background of it.
Sure
like
thing.
What was the inspiration? Because obviously we've spoken a lot on the show about native timbers, and WA was obviously the first Australian state to ban the logging of native timbers, right? Or some native timbers, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I think all of them, yeah. All of them that's not really grown in a sustainable circular capacity anyway.
Yep.
Yes, so the Banksia chair, the seed of the idea came from, I think I was down south in like Margaret River way, and I was at a market, and there was a young guy there selling beautiful wood turned items, and quite a few Banksia kind of like tea light holders and those aroma diffuser things. And I just looking at those in WA, it's you see a lot of them, obviously because a lot of Banksia's endemic to the region, and I just kind of thought, I wonder if there's anything else you could do with them as a material. I wonder if there's a different way of working with them.
So I have no idea what the Banksia is off the top of my head. I'm looking now.
Bloody Kiwis.
Yeah. Are we talking about like seed pods, like pine cone type things, or is this somehow the trunk timber?
Yeah, no, they're not far off from pine cones. Yeah, so it is the kind of discarded seed pods. This particular species being a Banksia grandis meaning large because they're literally like 300 mil tall. They're huge things down here.
This the seed pod. The seed pod is 300.
The seed pod, sorry, yeah. And I kind of had this thought, I wonder if there's any way to stack them together to form a spindle.
Right.
And I had a sketchbook with me, and I just kind of jotted down a couple of thoughts around it, and just a picture of a long stick, pretty much. And then I forgot about it. And then I had other things that I was working on, and I forgot about it for 2 years. And then I was putting on an exhibition for Fremantle Design Week, which goes on here every other year. And again, kind of trying to foster community in Perth in the design scene, because what hasn't ever really been too many group furniture design focused shows or exhibitions here. So I was like, right, I want to put one on, get some of my favorite WA makers together and put a show on for it. And then I was like, oh shit, what am I going to do for it? So I flicked through an old sketchbook and I was going through all my old ideas. And then I saw this. I was like, okay, I'll give that one a go. And fortunately, everything worked out for it, to be honest. Like, for such an idea not based on anything, I was just like, I wonder if you could put two together. Everything structurally and everything works out to its merit with the Banksia nuts. So, for instance, I'd never turned a Banksia nut before this, so I turned one, and obviously they look very porous. They've got these little nodules where the seeds disperse from, but fortunately, there's a very dense, solid core to each of them. If you turn them on the points exactly, right. It's probably about 25 mil in diameter of a real solid mass of timber, like a timber fibrous material there, that is perfect for a bit of joinery to join them together. And also being like a timber-ish product without any granularity or grain direction to it. You join them together. I was going to ask you
about grain direction, whether they had one.
No, not really. So there's no warping whatsoever. There's no twisting. I put these glue joints together. This chair I made nearly a year ago now. And the joints, you get perfect joints. And from what I've seen so far, it's been in all different conditions, out in the sunlight and in air-conditioned room. There's no, no worries with the joints. They seem...
It seems like it's almost just working with burls, really. Like it's like this grainless burl type thing that you can just do whatever you want with.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking of it, really, yeah. But yeah, when you're turning them, they're quite nice to turn as well. They're quite solid and hard. You've got to keep your tools sharp, but you can get a really nice finish on them off the lathe.
So can you go into the weeds a little bit? I assume, if looking at this chair, what I would assume is that you doweled a couple of, or 3 or 4 of these together and made some big dowels, and then you made a chair from it. But I don't actually think that's how you did it. So how
no, you're right. Yeah. So I did actually have the form of the chair. I had another design in mind that was kind of more like a Windsor chair with lots of little spindles. And I started making that. And halfway through, I realized that rather than just kind of cutting these long dowels I'm essentially making with them flat, I was like, if I mitered one of them, I could create rounded edges and create these bends and these junctions. And then I tested that out and it worked really well. And I was like, oh my God. So I just had this mad redesign halfway through to try and include as many of these angles as I could. And funny thing about this chair, like a lot more people appreciate the form of it, the shape of it, which was something that I just kind of ran with what I felt worked with the material at the time. And a lot of people talk about the actual shape and the form of the chair, not even taking the material into consideration.
Yeah,
that's what I was going to say. It's not really a one-liner.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of got that double barrelness to it.
I just assumed that you had used some form of resin to stabilize this. I can't believe that the inside
I was going to ask that.
Is that strong? So
you'd be so surprised, yeah.
So what we're looking at here, and this is what I couldn't figure out, is I can see that those seed holes are hollow, and that's like over there, and that's why they're hollow, is because you haven't done any
no filling,
resin stabilization with it. Yeah, wow.
Well,
and how did you go with getting so many of these? Did you go into native forests and do unquestionable things, or are they just strewn across Perth?
One thing I get from this, I didn't actually collect all the seed pods myself, but all my friends now just send me pictures of Banksia trees around all the time. They're like, oh, there's like a couple of nuts on here down in Scarborough or something. I'm like, no, I'm all good. I get that all the time now. But in a kind of commercial capacity, you need a license to harvest them.
Oh.
So if I wanted to make a chair like that, kind of for myself or to sell, I probably could get away with going down south on a little trip or going to some scrubs or bushland and just taking, once they've fallen to the floor is when they've dispersed all their seeds, and you can take them from the floor then. But if they've been on the floor too long, they do start to decompose a little. But yeah, you do need a license to harvest them and sell them. So there are a couple of harvesters down south, and one in particular who I'll give a shout out to is Callum from Jarrell Marray Timbers, if you've heard of them. They source a lot of burls from the southwest region as well and ship worldwide, because a lot of people use these Banksia nuts, they turn them for pen blanks or just little singular items, and they're seen as this exotic kind of timber around the world. And yeah, so a lot of people in Europe,
what the market for them is, because if there's people who can retrieve them, why are they doing that? But there is essentially like a kind of a knick-knack type market for making things out of them.
Yeah, that's it. And it's kind of only ever been capped at that, really. It's like little aroma diffusers and tea light holders and coasters is one thing as well. People would just slice them up. If you get one of a decent kind of 70 mil diameter, people chop them up for coasters.
It seems your design seems like it needs to have a coffee table built from, like you could so easily make that curvature, like nice big round legs, and come up to a rounded kind of frame, put a glass top on it, and you've got a set. It seems like that should be already done.
Yeah, I think that's the fun thing with it, is it's quite an elemental design detail, so it can just be pushed through loads of other typologies. You could make little side tables, benches, anything that you use a spindle or a dowel for. Essentially, it could work with. So yeah, watch this space with that for sure. I'm working out a few things at the moment, but yeah, definitely. It's a funny one as well when you like coming across something like this. I don't want to be turning Banksias for the rest of my life. I don't want to be Banksia boy. Yeah. I'm not looking to make that everything I do from now on. But saying that, there's quite a good demand for it, and it's turning a lot of heads at the moment. So I definitely have to do it justice in that capacity. But I think that might be looking to work with other manufacturers and licensing out the intellectual property side of things, and maybe designing a range for another manufacturer to produce. Because I think.
Sorry, it's just a really good point, and I think Bryan, probably you have an idea on this as well. I think that kind of like you've stumbled across a really popular, I guess. Immediately, everyone who sees it thinks, "Well, this is a cool thing, and there's potential in it." But smaller makers, exactly like you just described, you don't want to be bogged down by making the same thing over and over again. And so the potential for business and making a living, I think a lot of smaller makers just throw the idea away because they want to go do something else. But the idea of licensing out that design style seems like the perfect kind of remedy to not be stifled.
Yeah, you're right. And I think if you're someone who has a lot of ideas and wants to test out other ideas, and you've got a few other things you want to do, it's important. It's very easy to have these ideas, and I've kind of been looking at that Banksia chair for a year now, and it's important that I'm almost like over it, but there's still so much fuel in that fire that, yeah, a lot of designers will be like, I feel like I've pushed that to its limit, and I want to go on to the next thing. But no, like you can't just drop things like that. There's still other people that want to see it, and there's still a lot of legs left in projects, more so than you think with some of your own things. There's a lot more work that can be done with them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, getting back to the language of the piece, like I love that the chair is made up of three elements, obviously the base, the legs, and the back. But I was wondering, was it driven by the idea of separating the legs from the back, like having that double tube? Was that done because of the difficulty of achieving a three-way miter that was strong enough to support the back?
Yes, I think with the time constraints of the exhibition that I was pulling it together for, I couldn't even get my head around that. I was like, I'm not even going to entertain that.
I think visually it's far more interesting, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I think that was a constraint, but I feel like I would, if I had sketched something out, I probably would have preferred going down this route anyway. I don't really know how the form of it came about, to be honest. I think that as soon as I come up with this design, I think I knew that it was going to be structurally sound enough, and I knew this chair weighs over 10 kilograms. It's solid. Wow. It's so heavy, and you can tip back on the backrest. I've been like standing on it. I jump on it. It's absolutely solid, which you don't really get by looking at photos. No. And I think I kind of knew that in the material, even when I was working with it early on. So I wanted to show a chair that looks visually very light. You see, I've got those kind of that double barrel is essentially like a round dowel to a round dowel connection, which is very kind of hard to get your head around and hide any joinery or to make work in the first place. But it looks so light, and it looks like even the seat has a radius to the sides where it meets the dowel.
Yeah.
And
did you to connect the legs to the backrest legs? Is it just did you just plane a small flat surface into it, or is it dotted?
Yeah, there's ever so slightly a plane to that,
right. Yep.
and then it is a bit of threaded rod that runs through it.
Very nice.
Well, at 3 different points down that leg, and with that facet, you can't really see it from either side.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to show a chair that was visually light, because this is a physically heavy thing. But then also, a chair was a bit of a statement to say that this can be a very highly functional material. It's not just like a beautiful material, but it's not one of those chairs that it's like a concept piece, but you can't sit on it. Like, you could chuck this around a living room and it will just bounce back up. So it's my statement that, this can work as a material, not just visually appealing, but functionally appealing.
Do you know what I'd love to see, Mark? I'd love to see, I don't know whether you ever seen any of Like Butter's work, but Jem is a bit of a video guru and does some fun stuff with it. I would love to see a slow-mo drop of the chair.
Yeah, damn,
like I'm not talking from like 2 meters or anything, but just to see it in super slow-mo and to see what happens to it, it would be really interesting. But I love the piece. Like you're saying, it does look like quite a delicate, I don't know whether it looks light to me because of the diameter of the legs, but it looks delicate because of the Banksia. Like, I'm looking at that going, Jesus, that grain direction with those legs just snap. Yeah. But that's what I really like about it, that it is quite a solid, durable way of making something from what is essentially a byproduct. Like, not every one of those seeds is gonna be germinating and stuff. So it's really fascinating.
It's from.
Do you have to dry the cones? Do you have to dry the Banksia seeds?
So by the time they have naturally dropped from the tree, they're essentially dead, in the sense that all they're not green timber like you get from a tree at that point. It is kind of a dried husk of a seed pod, of a shell. So other than just drying in a traditional sense of like it might get a bit of rain on, you like, by the time they've fallen and harvested and been put away will be a few weeks, so it's dried in that capacity. But in terms of being like a green timber, no, it's very dry from that point on.
The design of this, I don't know if you've seen there's this idea that a great logo for a company you can draw it from memory, or your kids can draw it from memory. And Bryan and Robin and I both, all 3 of us have got small kids, and we are all probably very familiar with that drawing of a chair, which
fundamental
made
drawing,
like that perfect logo version of a 3-dimensional object chair that all of our kids draw every day. And it's like, maybe that's what it is that is resonating with me, is that it's like a real representation of the most basic concept of what a chair is. Even the large diameter legs and things, it's like your kid's using a felt tip pen and the line thickness is out of
holding
proportion.
the pen like this.
Yeah,
pushing as hard as they can.
A crayon stabbing through the paper, but that's kind of like, that's the proportion is actually about accurate, and it just works.
So what's next with this piece in terms of, like, are you exhibiting it further around Australia?
So with the Anabu Prize, it is currently in a showroom of theirs in Melbourne, as it being exhibited alongside the other two winners. But after that, it's going into an exhibition at the NGV towards the end of the year, which should be a fun one, focusing on makers and designers. And then who knows at that point? Be nice if it stays in Melbourne with someone. But we'll see. Something. But yeah, I think I've got a couple of other people interested in the chair in commissioning other ones. But I think with this chair, the actual design of it, I think I'm going to make those myself, but I'm going to do them in a limited edition run of them. But then once that chair design is through with that limited run, then I'm going to just focus on, working on other designs with manufacturers, or pushing it in a different direction.
It's interesting. You mentioned earlier, just kind of dawning on me a little bit, it was kind of tricky to find those seed pods. Is it like a pine tree is going to produce hundreds, thousands of pine cones on one big old pine tree? Are they really not that common on the Banksia, or just not common in a large size?
They are super common. You will get on any one kind of established tree, you'll probably get, I'd say 50 to 70 in any one season. And down south, there are a lot of trees.
There's not a short supply of them potentially. Like, there is plenty to go around.
Yeah, but what I think the way I work and envision things, it's all about the narrative spin you put on things. So what I like to think of with the Banksia nuts is that the license to harvest them is there to create a sustainable market around them, so that people aren't just kind of taking all of them, because as much as they are a waste product of a tree, they're still part of the carbon and nitrogen cycle. They still decompose in the ground and provide nutrients for the trees. So I want to limit obviously the license is there to limit the amount that is taken from the ecosystem. But then I like to spin that and look at it as nature's limited edition, really.
Right.
It's understanding that I can't go out and make 1,000 of these chairs, or even if I had the tooling, I couldn't make 1,000 of them, because you don't want to take that out of the ecosystem, and you physically can't really. So I think that makes this material a bit more special in that it is, I like to think if I did work with a manufacturer, then each year we could have, say, like a bench design, and one year it could be like, right, this year's nature's edition allows for 50 of these benches.
Right.
The next year it might only be 30 for some reason, if there's been droughts, or if there's been
cool concept. And it creates that that demand straight away. There's a demand there. So that's cool.
That's the way I'm looking at it. Yeah. Sorry, Robin, I think you're muted there.
Muted, I think, mate.
You know, that's the first one we've had this entire year. I was just saying so eloquently, thank you so much for coming on the show, Mark, but we do have to call it there because we are up to time. But thanks so much for sharing your story and some behind-the-scene details on that chair. That was really interesting.
No worries at all. Really appreciate you guys having me on, and love to talk about myself.
No, but it's just been really interesting to actually break down a piece like that, and for you to be open enough to share the techniques involved. I think that's the first time we've ever really done that about one particular piece of furniture. So thank you, Mark.
Yeah, I've looked forward to the opportunity of talking about the kind of woodworking side of things, because a lot of people who they see it, they want to talk about the idea of using the material and the design, but I've never had a chance to talk about actually like having it on the lathe and having it in a workshop with that material. So yeah, really appreciate the opportunity.
Cool.
Brilliant.
All right. Well, all the best. Thanks again. And yeah, we look forward to the next Banksia piece.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. See you later, man.
Cheers, Mark.
Bye.